Thumbs up. He needs the, oh,
Okay.
we're good.
Hey, you're live. You're live. You're live.
Let's go.
Alrighty, folks. Hello, everyone. Wow, so great to see so many. Wow, we really packed this place out. Are you sure couldn't have gotten a bigger room? Really, guys? Yeah. Are you sure? No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. But come on. Is the Grey Cup really that important when we got this room packed out? Come on. Come on. Are you kidding? I was talking to my friend Paige over the other day, and I actually said, this is kind of like a UFC ultimate brawl for nerds, right? I mean, come on, we're all a bunch of political junkies over here. So I'm just going to introduce myself. My name's Aaron Croning, and I'm the president of the University of Winnipeg Campus Conservatives. So, thank you. So it's really amazing to see such a phenomenal turnout to this event. You know, I see a lot of people I recognize, some I don't. My facial recognition isn't very great. Some of you may know. So I just want to open with a word of appreciation for my campus club people in the two front rows here. You guys are great, and you join me in tirelessly advocating for this debate right here, right now, to be hosted on our campus by our student group. And you know, I asked the UW staff as well when the last time a student group independently hosted a debate such as this sort of big ticket event, so to speak. And they couldn't really give me a clear answer. So, you know, it could have been decades, it could have been never. So I'm very proud of my people here at the University of Winnipeg Campus Conservatives for really encouraging this thing to go through. It took a lot of work, but we did it in a week, and I'm really proud of that. I just want to give you some backstory. It all started with an exchange in the House of Commons. Mr. Lamoureux challenged Mr. Genuis to a debate in front of students on a Winnipeg campus. Now, I was just having my coffee watching this, and as soon as we saw that clip, we all dropped what we were doing. Jordan, Deanna, Kelsey, who couldn't be here, and I immediately went and phoned up Mr. Lamoureux, Mr. Genuis' offices, and we said, hey, how's it going? We're a student group at Winnipeg, and if you fellas are speaking to students, it ought to be organized by the students themselves. So our campus was the place to do it. As I understand, Mr. Lamoureux also used to teach here. So I want to thank both MP offices especially as well. Your folks have been wonderful in getting this set up. I mean, really, I couldn't have done it without them. They've been amazing to work with for all of this and making it, again, possible in only a week. So one thing I've heard quite often, a lot of our friends are going around, they're saying, now how in the world did you get this organized? How did you get the powers that be to agree to this? And you know, my answer to that is a lot of sweet talking. I may be 5'9", okay? But I am one heck of a sweet talker. Try me. And you know, I may be a sweet talker and I may be a charmer as well, but I'm also a fighter. And I'm determined to fight for our generation's future. I've gotten to know a lot of our people, and I will say a lot of our folks in Gen Z are frustrated at the optics that our generation faces. My parents could afford a good home and a safe community. My dad was blue collar, and my mom worked in healthcare. And I just want to say that they are the two most hardworking and honest people I know, a Protestant work ethic and a Catholic conscience. They had to work hard for what they got, but the creeping reality for my generation seems to be that they'll need to adapt to a worse standard of living, that of which was enjoyed by our parents. Now, in this debate, we're going to be talking about issues of national interest, issues that are of utmost importance to our generation, concerning the current state of immigration, the economy, and affordability in our country. We at the UWCC are doing this because we love Canada. We believe strongly in king and country, and we want to continue to lead the nation left behind by our forefathers. Our generation is off the playground. We're ready and asking for a seat at the table. When we take the reins, we still want a Canada or a piece of Canada left over to lead. And now, my partisan affiliations at this point are of no question. And I'm sure a few of you in the room hate my guts right now. But I think it's so important that we organize this dialogue between opposing points of view that we see right here before us tonight. And that's why I really want to thank Mr. Lamoureux, or Kevin, as he told me to call you, for coming out and letting us host this thing. You're setting a standard tonight, sir. And Mr. Genuis, my club are all big followers of yours, and we see the work and advocacy you do. Thank you both. Now, I'm probably sure you're sick of me talking at this point, so I'm going to hand the show to our moderator, the best possible moderator we could have had for this event, really. We've reconnected recently in university. We were once a couple of high school kids goofing off in Mr. Robson's ICT class. He's the most fair and objective classmate I know on this campus, a fellow student and leader of the UW Philosophy Club, Callum Young-Thiessen. So, for tonight, our schedule. We have 3 topics, 25 minutes for each one. The first is the liberal approach to the economy working? The second is the liberal approach to immigration working? And the third is, are the Conservatives playing a constructive role in Parliament? Now, there will be a yes opener and a no opener for 4 minutes each. Yes rebuttal, no rebuttal, 5 minutes each, and then a no and a yes concluding 3 minutes each. And afterwards, we'll be hosting a Q&A. I'll be setting up a stand over there, and we can ask some questions with the MPs. So I'll start off with, is the liberal approach to the economy working? Mr. Lamoureux, which side do you take?
I'm speaking the yes side.
Please tell us why.
Good evening. It's great to actually be with you here this evening. I'm looking forward to this. Ever since Garrett and I had this discussion on the floor of the House of Commons, where I made the suggestion, and I've made the suggestion to other MPs, and he's the first member of Parliament to actually take me up on it. And I think it's fantastic. And if you ask the question, when has this happened before? I've been in politics for a number of years now. And I can honestly say this is the first time I've actually had someone take me up on having this type of a discussion. And I think it's absolutely critical. It's really encouraging to be able to get a group of young people, and maybe some that are not so young, in present, to hear and see the contrast. Because it goes far beyond the question period. If you listen to question period, you think that the politicians don't get along. We actually do get along in many different ways. And we might differ in opinions and have different thoughts. But at the end of the day, I think we all are very proud of our Canadian heritage. We all want to make the communities that we live in a better place than when we first got elected. I think that's all what we strive to achieve. But when I reflect on the last federal election, the thing that comes to my mind is, I always say, the 3 T's: Trump, trade, and tariffs. That came up every day during the campaign. People love our nation. We feel very proud. We have a good, high sense of pride in who we are as Canadians. And Donald Trump, in a few words, brought us together. I like to think during that campaign, we talked a great deal about what would a liberal government under the stewardship of Mark Carney deliver on. Mark Carney is someone that was the governor of the Bank of Canada, the governor of the Bank of England. He's an economist. He understands what makes an economy work. As I think I've been in politics for many years, he is not necessarily a politician. He says what he believes, and he knows what he understands will actually work to make our economy stronger. We want to build a strong Canada, a Canada in which all of us can be proud of, but to set a goal by saying we want to be the strongest of the G7 countries in the world. That is our goal. And we have to be able to look in terms of what has transpired. So when you pose the question, are we on the right track? There's no doubt whatsoever in my mind. We are on the right track. We are moving forward like no other government in the generations in terms of ensuring that we are in fact doing the things that are necessary to protect our economy, our jobs, our social programs, the things that make us feel as good as we can about our Canadian and being a Canadian. So, for example, when you think of trade, we are too dependent on the United States. We have a prime minister that shortly after getting elected, meted with the different premiers. We brought in Bill C-5 to build one Canadian economy.
30 seconds.
We understand the issue of affordability. That's why we brought in Bill C-4 to ensure that we can give tax breaks. So ensure we can get rid of the carbon tax in law. There's a number of initiatives that we've taken, and I believe through this debate, you'll find that we are a government that is committed to making a difference. Thank you.
Mr. Genuis, which side do you take on is the Liberal approach to the economy working?
Well, I'll take no. Thank you all for being here. I want to thank the local campus conservatives for hosting this. I want to thank my good colleague, Kevin Lamoureux. Look, we don't agree on much, but Kevin has been in public service for about as long as I've been alive. And whether you agree or not, you have to respect someone who puts in the long nights and the long flights. It's not quite as far coming from Winnipeg as it is from Edmonton, but he's been doing it for a lot longer than I have. So it's a real pleasure to be able to speak to you today. And I want to say that I'll respond to some of the things that Kevin said later in my rebuttal, but I want to frame this discussion about the economy by pointing out just how much of a pivot point for our country economically 2015 was. Now, in 2015, we had a balanced budget. Homes were affordable. We had a deficit we had a debt that was less than half of its current level, less than half of our current level. And in the 2015 election, Justin Trudeau made certain arguments about the economy. He made arguments around a different kind of approach to the economy that he was going to pursue. The arguments he made in that election were that deficit-fueled investment would lead to growth. Up until then, the orthodoxy had been defended by conservatives and New Democrats, actually, was that we should have balanced budgets. But the Liberals under Mr. Trudeau said we should run deficits in order to invest and that this will fuel growth. That was the core argument of 2015. And also, he made the argument that blocking natural resource development, that imposing severe limitations that would prevent the development of our natural resources and the creation of pipelines, that these coupled with kind of subsidies for preferred industries and a tough application of industrial carbon pricing, he posited that this would be good for our economy because it would lead to the proliferation of jobs of the future. Now, we can empirically test whether or not that worked. We have more than doubled our national debt. What were supposed to be three $10 billion deficits were quickly blown through. Incredible increase in the debt burden that you have to carry. And you are paying for all these deficits through inflation and through higher taxes. But what have been the results? Have we dramatically changed our quality of life in a positive way as a result of these deficit-fueled investments? No. Empirically, the Justin Trudeau economic philosophy failed. And this is why we now have a relatively lower standard of living. We've had effectively no productivity growth. Despite the aspirations, we have the fastest shrinking economy in the G7. We are notably, clearly, verifiably worse off than we were 10 years ago. And the reason why it's important to remember the arguments made by Justin Trudeau in 2015, and this is so important. The same arguments, exactly the same arguments, are being made today by Mark Carney. What is the core argument? Yes, he says it's a new Liberal government. But the core argument of the 2025 budget is that deficit-fueled investment will lead to growth. It's the same argument. It's that with this new budget, deficit record smashing budget, the highest deficit in this nation's history outside of the COVID period, over $78 billion. This is supposed to be deficit-fueled investment leading to growth. But we know empirically that from the first 10 years of the Liberal government, it has failed, it has made us poorer. The continuation and expansion of industrial carbon pricing will not make us richer, it will make us poorer, as it has over the last 10 years. This is why this is the wrong approach. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank God. Let me deal with the deficit and debt head on. If you take a look at it, you have to take a look in terms of where Canada is at with respect to what I would suggest to the rest of the world, in particular the G7 countries, countries like the United States and Israel. And what you'll find is that if you take a look at Canada's net debt GDP ratio, that we are actually the lowest in the G7 countries. If you take a look at the deficit, you will find that we are, in essence, tied with Japan of the G7 countries. It is grossly exaggerated in terms of the government of Canada putting, whether it's the youth or the today's generation or whomever, into a debt crisis. It's just not true. In fact, if you take a look at the real value of the dollar, of the overall debt, let's say back in 2009, and that's when, in fact, Pierre Poilievre would have been in the Conservative caucus. The actual percentage of debt to GDP ratio was higher in 2009 than what it is today, compared to the actual revalue of the dollars, actually revaluing the dollars. So I don't want to spend too much time dealing with the idea of what I believe is a fictitious argument. You need to invest in Canada. If you're going to build Canada strong, that means you have to look and protect industries that are going to create the type of jobs that are absolutely critical to the future of our country. That's what you need to do. So when you talk about what kind of investments, you can talk about the billions that we're investing in terms of highways, bridges, airports, hospitals, even community structures. Yes, that costs money and that will add value to our debt, but it'll make Canada that much stronger from an economic and a social perspective. And that's what we should be thinking about. Do you believe we should be investing in Canada, or do we just stand by in hopes that things will just work their way through? Affordability is such an important issue. You know, at the end of the day, I am concerned. I remember being in opposition back in 2013, 14, when we were talking about young people living in the basements of their parents because they can't afford to live outside on their own. That issue continues to be there today. Obviously, I'm concerned about it. I think every member of Parliament is concerned about that. But the issue is, what are you going to do? That's why, contrary to the previous administration, we're enhancing, we're supporting the Canada Summer Youth Job Program. A program that has provided career jobs for summer students. And you don't even have to be a student in order to be able to qualify necessarily. These are the types of programs that we need to invest in, even if it means that we have to borrow money to do so. It's providing the programs and support so that people can continue to enhance their skill sets in journeyman type of programs, apprenticeship programs. These are all critically important. I talked about trade, tariffs, and Trump. Take a look in terms of, as we wait, because we're not going to just sign any agreement. We want the best deal possible for Canadians. That is our objective with the United States trade. Yeah. But we need to do more while we wait. The Prime Minister has talked a great deal about diversifying, looking at other ways in which we can explore trade. He just came back from Asia, where we're talking with Indonesia and having an agreement. We just brought in legislation with England becoming a part of the Trans-Pacific legislation. We're now talking about the Philippines. Look around in the province of Manitoba. The Philippines has a wonderful opportunity to be able to secure a trade agreement. The Prime Minister met with President Marcos and said, 2026, we want a trade agreement. The best thing that we can do for our businesses here is those businesses that are being negatively affected, provide them support through tariff relief where we can, and look at expanding their markets. If we find those markets, we're protecting jobs. If we can expand those markets, no other country has as many trade agreements with our G20 countries as Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lamoureux. Mr. Genuis.
Thank you. So let's talk first about the state of our fiscal situation. We have a record-breaking deficit with this budget. This is the worst budget deficit in Canadian history outside of the COVID period. And my colleague and friend here says it's not that big a deal in the scheme of things, he says. Well, don't take my word for it. The Parliamentary Budget Office has said that the government's fiscal situation, it's stupefying, it's shocking, it's unsustainable. So I'll take the nonpartisan Parliamentary Budget Officer's assessment that the situation fiscally is stupefying, shocking, and unsustainable over that of another MP from any party. Now, he makes the point that, well, what about comparisons to other countries? I think it's important to note that the government tries to cherry pick the figures that look best for them. For instance, when they talk about the total government debt, they try to include in that the assets of the CPP program. So the Canada Pension Plan assets, which are set aside to pay for our pensions, that is not relevant to the fiscal capacity of the federal government. And yet the federal government is trying to incorporate that in their calculations to try and suggest the situation is not what it is. But again, I'll refer to the comments of the Parliamentary Budget Officer. Now, on the subject of investment, I think this is critical here. The word investments is always used. This is an investment. Don't worry, we're spending more than we have, but it's an investment, right? And the government has tried to fudge the numbers to reframe how you actually calculate the budget deficit. Say, well, these are investments. But they are including far more things in investments than could plausibly be justified. And they are, I would say, fudging the numbers. And unfortunately, when you fudge around, you're going to find out. We're going to deal with the consequences of this, because this is an excuse to justify any kind of spending that the government wants to make. Now, I think that the critical piece for determining what the state of our economy is going to be going forward is productivity. Productivity is how much an individual worker can produce through their labor. And it's not a measure of how hard a person works, it's a measure of the combination of factors, their circumstances, the capital they have at their disposal, how much they are able to produce in the course of their work. Now, our productivity has flatlined in this country. There is a massive gap in our productivity compared to that of other countries. And in order to address this critical emerging gap in productivity, a problem that predates any of the tariff policies that we're presently dealing with in the United States. In order to deal with this, we need to again become a desirable destination for private sector investment. The government's position is that they can increase taxes, increase spending as a means of investment, but that is costing you in inflation. That is costing us in private sector investment. That is costing you in your taxes. So we need to be a country with low taxes. That's an attractive destination for investment, where government gets out of the way, where private sector, entrepreneurs, businesses are making these investments in things that are going to improve productivity and grow the economy. Kevin's theories about the economy are ones that have been empirically tested over the last 10 years. And they have been found wanting. We spoke a little bit about Trump. Let's underline that the Carney government promised a deal with Trump by the end of July. It wasn't us that promised that, it was them who promised that, and they have failed to deliver on that. But regardless, in the meantime, we should be focusing on getting government out of the way so that investments can be made and our economy can grow here in Canada. The government has left in place bills like C-48, Bill C-69 that block energy investment. They've created a mechanism by which they can give special approval to certain companies or certain projects to bypass normal regulatory processes, but they haven't cleaned up the regulatory process so that the vast majority of projects can actually move forward. These economic failures, the failures on productivity, these are things that you are dealing with the impacts of downstream. They are the reason why life is becoming less affordable. They are the reason why housing prices have doubled, why youth unemployment is now over 14%, more than a full percentage point over what it was a year ago. These are the reasons why 50,000 people have lost their jobs since Mark Carney became Prime Minister. It's because the economic agenda of the Trudeau-Carney Liberals that is still being defended simply does not work.
Thank you. I actually brought one quote that I thought I actually might use because of the whole deficit and the issue surrounding it. And Garnet made reference to the fact that here's something that's independent. People here have heard of the International Monetary Fund. I believe it's around 150 plus countries, and they have drawn some conclusions. Here's one of the ones the IMF managing director Kristalina Georgieva has said, and I will quote, both Germany and Canada recognize that in this very testing time, they need to use their fiscal space. In the case of Canada, the Canadian authorities have been very decisive to take action in the context of changing the relationship with their main trading partner. And one of these actions is indeed to reform, modernize the budget framework, separating operating expenses in the budget investment, that ability to focus strategically in investments that are pro-growth, that can lift up productivity. This is someone that's truly independent. And when I take a look in terms of just how the contrast between what you see in Ottawa today, I would suggest you do not fool yourself. The air quality is very real. And at the end of the day, he does have a very different approach to governing than the Liberal Party of Canada, than Prime Minister Mark Carney in the Liberal caucus. You see, I highlighted the fact that we believe in investments. Investments, if you take a look at the first number of years of Stephen Harper and contrast that to what that Justin Trudeau brought in, you'll find that the number of jobs created in the same time span is virtually double the amount. You'll find that there has been all forms of social programs.
1 minute.
If you take a look at what we have been able to bring in a very short period, Mark Carney made a commitment, for example, for the National School Food Program. That's been an issue since 1988. There are children going to our schools that have empty stomachs, and you cannot learn on an empty stomach. So whether it is social programs or investing in the infrastructure of Canada, these are the types of things that will allow Canada to be the best country in the world to call home. Thank you.
Thank you. If you listen to government members today, they will all but admit that the economic philosophy of Justin Trudeau didn't work. And it's simply hard to dispute that objectively. We know where we are compared to where we were 10 years ago. I've talked to young people on campuses asking them the question, are you better or worse off than your parents' generation? And overwhelmingly now the answer is worse off. Rent has doubled, housing costs have doubled in many places. There are so many economic challenges. Young people are concerned about their future. And it ties back to policy choices, the false promise that deficit-fueled investment would somehow lead to growth. And despite the tacit admission, we have Liberals under Mark Carney doubling down on exactly the same philosophy. You could put up Bill Morneau's comments side by side with Mark Carney's comments, and you can see the same arguments being made about how record-breaking deficits will lead to growth. They didn't before, they will not again. That's why, since this Prime Minister took office about 6 short months ago, the country has lost another 50,000 jobs. It will not get better if we double down on a failed approach. We need a new approach. Conservatives have proposed constructive options for unleashing our economy, repealing Bill C-48 and C-69 so that our energy sector can move forward. We proposed in the last election a reinvestment tax credit so that when companies reinvest the profits of capital gains here in Canada, they will not pay any capital gains tax on if they immediately reinvest that here in Canada. These kinds of aggressive incentives encouraging reinvestment here in Canada, getting rid of the industrial carbon price. These are the kinds of policies that get government out of the way to encourage private sector investment that will lead to productivity growth. Before the budget, we put forward the Conservative Youth Jobs Plan. Unleash the economy, fix immigration, fix training, and build homes where the jobs are. Unfortunately, the government failed to take our constructive proposals forward. The Carney approach is the same as the Trudeau approach. It is, again, this idea that blocking the development of our most productive, critical energy sector, that fueling higher deficits and calling it investment. Just because you call it investment doesn't mean it isn't government spending and doesn't mean it isn't crowding out the kind of measures that are actually going to lead to productivity growth. This is a trick of classification. It failed under Justin Trudeau and Bill Morneau, and it will sadly fail again under Mark Carney and Champagne. And that's why we need a new conservative approach to get our economy moving again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Genuis. Okay, now we're on to the second question. Is the Liberal approach to immigration working? Mr. Lamoureux, yes or no?
I'm going to say yes, but there is some need for change, no doubt about it. But let me first, before I get into that, the nice thing about, I was never a teacher here, but I was a student. And I can tell you that it's wonderful to be able to have Google nowadays. And I would really suggest that you take a look and consider some of the things that might be said and look at Google. For example, when they said that there's 50,000 jobs lost, did you know in September there was over 60,000 jobs created? Did you know in October there was over 60,000 jobs also created of this year? There's a number of things that you might hear this evening that you should actually fact check also. When you think of foreign investment, think in terms of the last time I spoke on foreign investment in the House, on the floor of the House of Commons was last year, and I talked about in the 2023, Canada was number one in the G7 in terms of direct foreign and investment coming into the country. In comparison to the rest of the world, we were number 3 in the world. So if you take a look at whether it's where we need to move into the future, I believe that the budget that was just tabled is a good roadmap to ensure that we get to where we want to be. And that is the strongest of the G7 countries. On immigration, we'll start by left.
2 minutes, 30 seconds.
2 minutes, 30 seconds. Let me quickly go through this. I think we've got to put it in a proper context of time. Yes, there are serious issues in regards to immigration, but what brought us here and how do we get out of it? Under Mark Carney, we have seen a commitment to stabilize immigration, and the numbers are showing that that's actually what is happening. You need to go back to 2014 of January when there was a policy decision that we needed to be able to increase the number of students coming into the country. We reset the numbers to say that we want by 2022 over 320,000, might actually be 420,000, I have it here somewhere, 450,000 international students was the target for 2022. Even though, if you take a look at 2009, we had unemployment of youth at 15%. At 2013, it was just over 13%. But yet, we saw the benefits of increasing the numbers. And that's what took place. We saw huge increases in international students coming into Canada. And then when you put into fact the pandemic and the issues that the pandemic caused, that did not make things easier in terms of being able to make the changes that were necessary. You also have to factor in the different regions of the country. Manitoba's needs are very different, and we dealt with immigration very differently than the province of Ontario or BC.
1 minute.
These are the types of things that we have to take into consideration. Yes, Ottawa needed to take some actions. And with Mark Carney, we are doing that. We are stabilizing immigration numbers. You'll see that in terms of hard numbers. 60%, I believe it is, less in terms of temporary visas being issued. These are the types of things in which we are doing today in order to ensure that we have sustainable immigrant numbers going forward. We had to overcome. Take a look at the province of Manitoba, and when I get my rebuttal, I'll provide further comments in regards to Manitoba. I've met with the provincial minister of immigration. I've had correspondence from at least 10 ministers at the province. They want us to be able to continue to renew work permits because Manitoba needs immigration. I'll continue with it. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Just briefly on the jobs numbers, since Kevin raised that, 50,000 net job losses since Mark Carney took office. And our job situation is getting considerably worse. Kevin cited some month-to-month variation, but here's the overall picture. Youth unemployment is over 14%. It's at 14.1%. That is more than a full percentage point higher than it was a year ago at this time. It is overall unemployment rate is 6.9 compared to 6.5 a year ago at this time. So unemployment is getting worse, and this is an escalating challenge, which is why we put forward constructive policies to try to resolve it. Those policies include proposals around fixing immigration. Now, I feel for Kevin sometimes because he is the guy who's got to stand up every day in the House of Commons and defend the Liberal policy of the day. And if the Liberals change their position, you know, Kevin is there to tell you why the Kevin of yesterday was wrong and the Kevin of today is right. And if they change their policies again, the Kevin of tomorrow will be right and the Kevin of today will be wrong. And there's a part of me that admires his kind of commitment to the authentic living out of his responsibilities, even if I disagree with both the Kevin of yesterday, the Kevin of today, and I suspect I will disagree with the Kevin of tomorrow. But I will invite him to cross the floor, actually, at which point I might start. The only problem is if he were to join our caucus, we would have to fight over who gets the speaking slots, you know. We both like speaking in the House so much. Anyways, folks, like with the economy, 2015 was a pivot point on immigration. The tragedy of it is that our country has been so blessed by immigration over the years, and there has been a pro-immigration consensus up to a certain point in this country. Under Stephen Harper, we had in global terms, very high sustained levels of immigration. And there was strong public support for those high levels of immigration because it was working well, because our immigration system was well aligning our welcoming of newcomers with our national interests and with our values. We were able to welcome the most vulnerable refugees. We were able to bring people that could fill specific skill gaps in a way that would allow us to catalyze further economic opportunities for those who were already here. And under Stephen Harper, our relatively high levels of immigration were also sustainable. They were in line with our ability to absorb new people in terms of our housing, our healthcare, and our job needs. Under the Liberals, they have shown flagrant disregard for these considerations, for the need for prudence in our immigration policy. 1 minute. And you can see in how the national conversation has changed around this, the profound failures of the Liberals to deliver an immigration system that works and that maintains public support. What we have heard at the Human Resources Committee, particularly where I serve, where we're doing a study on youth unemployment, is how the direction of our immigration system has changed to exacerbate intensifying competition for entry-level positions. And this has contributed to very high levels of youth unemployment. It doesn't have to be this way. You can have an immigration system that works by having people coming in at higher skill levels, being able to come in and with the ability to invest in creating jobs for young people. But the way the Liberals have designed and unfold the immigration system, including failures of credential recognition, exacerbated competition with young people for entry-level jobs, leading to very high levels of youth unemployment.
Thank you, Mr. Lamoureux.
Thank you. And I must admit, Garnet is right. On one occasion, I did have one classified as a flip-flop. But I can tell you, I was not alone. In fact, if you take a look at the 2019 federal election, did you know that every political party supported a carbon tax? Take a look at the platforms. All political parties supported a carbon tax. Conservatives had a new leadership, great. And then that caused the Conservative Party to flip-flop, and they actually then were in opposition to move to a carbon tax. And just this year, earlier this year, the Liberal Party also had a leadership race. And Mark Carney made the decision at the very onset, dealing in terms of the issue of affordability, that he does not support a carbon tax. And the first thing he did, assuming the chair virtually, was to get rid of the carbon tax. So if you check answered, there was a time in which I said, yes, the carbon tax was good. And today I will tell you that carbon tax is not good. So I confess. But in fairness, the Conservatives did the same flip-flop too, right? Yeah. Things change. You have to put things into proper perspective. That's what it is that I do on the floor of the House of Commons. I try to take a look in terms of what is being said, because it's not only responsible for the government, there's a minority government. Everyone's got to be responsible. It's Canadians that we work for. They are our board of directors. Just because you're in opposition doesn't mean that you can get away with saying anything you want. There's a sense of accountability. And that's one of the roles that I play on the floor of the House of Commons, is I like to ensure that there is as least amount of misleading information that appears on the floor, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about democracy. But in regards to the immigration file, take a look at the province of Manitoba. In Manitoba, as I mentioned, I've had discussions with the Minister of Immigration here. I've had correspondence from the Premier and different ministers. I've had correspondence from businesses, the mayors, I should say both mayors, I'm not too sure. I believe I got one from our Winnipeg mayor. We got Chamber of Commerce's. We've got all sorts of groups. And there's a common theme that they're talking about. Rural Manitoba does not want to lose immigrants by us adopting, in essence, Pierre Poilievre's policy of just saying no. I don't think they've really thought it out. Imagine that. Approximately 300,000, don't quote me on it, 300,000 people that came from Ukraine into Canada. Many of them, tens of thousands, that came to the province of Manitoba. Many of them need to get working permits extended. Is that not something that we should do? What about when we have rural communities that actually are begging to be able to keep their working permits? They brought life to rural communities. Is there not value in terms of us supporting rural Manitoba? These are the types of things that we have to be looking at. Yes, because of previous announcements that date back all the way back to 2014 when I was in opposition, and the pandemic and other factors that are out there, we are in a very difficult spot. But we have a prime minister that has made it very clear we will stabilize immigration in Canada. And that is a commitment that we're well underway at achieving. I say 50% already in terms of cuts to the temporary worker program. To date, we will hit our targets. We will work with the many different stakeholders that are there.
1 minute.
But we need to realize that the regional differences are very real and tangible. Back in 2004, when the door was open, you had provinces like Ontario that were opening up all forms of private facilities. There was campaigns abroad, going to different countries saying, come to Canada, get an education and become a permanent resident. many of those students were actually exploited. And then they come to Canada, where there's it's an island. And then they see that in certain ways, we want to make them a victim again because they were lied to or misled, if I want to be kind.
20
Someone's
seconds.
got to stand up and say the right things in regards to immigration. I work closely with the Minister of Immigration because I love our province and I understand the value that they bring to our province. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, confession is good for the soul. It's true. Kevin has changed his position on the carbon tax. Curiously, he changed his position at exactly the same time as his party did. I will not confess anything though, because I never defended the carbon tax. The member can search. I guess I can address it. Kevin, you can search my Twitter. You can search Hansard. I've said a lot of things in the House of Commons. There's a lot of words to go through, but you will not find a positive word anywhere about the carbon tax. I have always opposed it, and will continue to do so. And I will oppose all of the carbon taxes, including the industrial carbon tax, which you still defend. We've had some, the Liberals are no longer defending the one carbon tax. They're defending other carbon taxes in hopes you're less likely to know this. Folks, on immigration, I want to underline what I said at the beginning, that we are in favor of an immigration system that welcomes people in a prudent fashion, that works well, that aligns with the interests and values of this country. That is why under Stephen Harper, we had what were up till that point the highest sustained immigration levels in this country's history. And we did so in a way that had very high levels of public support. The Liberals tragically have broken the system. It has not worked under the Liberals. And this is the question we're debating is the Liberal approach working or not? And Kevin alluded to issues around temporary immigration, because this has been an area of debate. It's important to understand this distinction, right? So the Liberals put forward a levels plan in terms of the number of permanent immigrants that would come to this country. But over and above that, they allowed a very large number of temporary migrants to this country through various kinds of streams. Now, one area where we've seen high levels of temporary migration is asylum claims, people who come across the border and claim asylum here. And it is critically important that we have a system that can adjudicate those claims quickly. And the Liberals have failed to deliver on that. We have a system instead where people are living in this country for years and years and years as their claims are in limbo, waiting for them to be adjudicated. I can't see why anyone from any ideology or any side of the spectrum would say it's reasonable for people to have to wait for years and years and years before their asylum claim should be adjudicated. It's in our national interest, and it's in their interest to have those claims adjudicated in a reasonable amount of time so that they can have the certainty of either moving on with their life here or moving on with their life somewhere else. And an inefficient, ineffective asylum system where you have people staying here for years and years without their claims being adjudicated limits our ability to welcome the most vulnerable refugees from other parts of the world. Also in temporary immigration. So we have seen a massive problem of temporary foreign workers coming to this country and taking jobs that should be available to Canadian young people. And the system for enforcement, for adjudication of those applications is not efficient, it's not effective, there's rampant abuse in the program, and it is simply not necessary for people to come from overseas in these temporary roles to take positions that could be taken by Canadian young people. And this program has been widely criticized by people across the political spectrum, recognizing that there's a particular vulnerability associated with temporary immigration, that those who come through permanent streams have the certainty of being in this country, are in a much better position. They have stronger relative bargaining power with their employer. They're not in the same vulnerable position as those who come through.
1 minute.
And then we've seen profound failures by the government on the issue of credential recognition. So when you have someone who comes to this country who has skills they could be using to fill a skill gap, working as a doctor, working in the forestry sector, working in some area where skill recognition is required. And they're not able to work in that field. Instead, are forced to take an entry-level position where they're competing with young people for that position. That is a double negative for our economy. We're losing out on having that person fill a critical skill gap, and that person is competing for an entry-level job that a young Canadian could be in. This is why we have put a focus squarely on the need for stronger, more effective credential recognition, recognizing the skills of those who come here so that we don't have these persistent gaps and escalating competition for entry-level positions for young people. You could see in the youth unemployment numbers, in the pressure on housing, in the pressure on healthcare, how the system has been broken. Thanks.
Yeah, again, just to pick up a little bit on the whole carbon pricing or carbon tax, I can't resist it. I'm sorry. At the end of the day, Garnet, I think you might actually be right. I don't know if I've ever heard you actually say that you're in favor of a carbon tax, but it is important to recognize that all political parties were at one time in favor of it. Mark Carney changed our position on it, and I applaud him for doing so. At the end of the day, the industrial carbon tax is very different. In fact, if you look at the origins of the carbon tax, industrial carbon tax, I believe it was the province of Alberta that actually brought it in. In fact, it might even be the first jurisdiction, don't quote me on it, it might even be the first jurisdiction in North America that actually brought in an industrial carbon tax. I'm sure someone will find out and let me know if that is in fact accurate. But at the end of the day, I believe there is a responsibility to the environment, and we're not necessarily talking about environment, maybe they'll come up with questions, but there is an obligation there. For us, we believe in sustainable development, investing strong in Canadian technology, looking at ways in which we can improve, but I don't want to get onto the environment. I want to continue on with the immigration file. There's a couple thoughts coming out of Garnet's comments. One is in regards to credentials. Immigrant credentials, I can tell you there's been an issue since I was first elected to the Manitoba legislature back in 1988. And you have the federal government or the federal conservatives saying, you know what we're going to do? We're going to approve a steel program. We're going to recognize. There are literally thousands of healthcare workers that could be working in our healthcare system today, but because of us not recognizing those credentials, they're not working in that area. I find that sad. And I found that sad for decades. But here's the reality. The federal government doesn't recognize those credentials.
50 seconds.
The best the federal government can do is to ensure that their provinces are doing and taking actions on that issue. And that is why, under this budget with Mark Carney, we are seeing a serious investment to encourage provinces to deal with immigrant credentials. The numbers that we're talking about are under control. We are stabilizing it. And I believe at the end of the day that immigration is absolutely critical to the future of Canada in terms of how we manage that file. And I am absolutely confident that we are on the right track in working with the different stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, the difference between the industrial carbon price and the consumer carbon price is one is visible and one is hidden. But they are both costs that are applied to the production of things. And whether those costs are on the sticker or whether they're in the inputs, they are still very much costs that consumers have to pay. Mark Carney famously tried to distract from this by saying, well, these costs will apply to things like steel. Come on, you don't use much steel, Kevin, do you? When was the last time you bought steel? As if people weren't supposed to notice the number of appliances they have and things they use on a daily basis that in fact have these items as their input. Now, on the issue of immigration, I believe that we had a consensus in favor of an immigration system that was working before these liberals took office. These liberals broke the immigration system. And I want to read you a quote that says that. You don't have to take my word for it. Somebody said, the system became even harder to manage and less functional. and the pace of arrivals began to exceed Canada's capacity to absorb and support newcomers in the way we are used to doing. In 2018, 3.3% of Canada's population were temporary residents. By 2024, that number had more than doubled to 7.5, an unprecedented rate of growth that put pressure on housing supply, the healthcare system, and schools. This system is no longer sustainable. Do you know where that quote comes from? This year's federal budget. There has been a clarification of conscience. But unfortunately, this government is not prepared to deliver the changes that are required, even while paying lip service to the problem, to the fact that this has been a system that was working well and tragically was broken. But we can create an immigration system that works again, that aligns with our interests and values.
1 minute.
That is welcoming the most vulnerable, welcoming those who can fill skill gaps in this country and have those skills recognized. And I'm sorry, but saying that something has been a problem since 1988 and still hasn't been solved is not an excuse. We do not have a Blue Seal program right now. We need solutions to this problem. And in the last election, Conservatives put forward constructive solutions around credential recognition. Now, much of the credential recognition happens at the provincial level, but the federal government has a credential recognition program, a credential recognition fund, and in this budget, they announced that they were going to create an additional separate fund to duplicate the work of the existing fund. Well, how about we actually get the existing fund doing what it's supposed to be doing? The federal government has responsibilities, has policies in this area, and has simply failed to deliver. Thanks.
Now moving on to the third question. Are the Conservatives playing a constructive role in Parliament? Mr. Lamoureux, which side are you on?
I'm on the no side.
Oh, yes, you're right. So, Mr. Genuis, which side are you on? Because you're supposed to start.
Trick question.
Well, I thought this would be a good one to include because Kevin has famously referred to me as a mischievous little fellow. I was so proud of that quote, I put it up on the wall in my office. And he said, we are a destructive force, So I wanted to talk a bit about the critical work that the official opposition does in Parliament. It is our constitutional obligation to hold the government accountable for their failures, but also to put forward constructive proposals around key public issues facing this country. And I think in particular under Pierre Poilievre, we have put forward many specific constructive proposals to confront the challenges facing this country. And one key area where we've done that is in the area of housing. We propose specific policies recognizing the need to significantly grow the housing stock. Now, in some cases, the government has tried to steal those ideas. For instance, it was Conservatives that announced a constructive proposal around taking the GST off new homes. Unfortunately, they didn't implement it right. They didn't implement it enough. And this is why you need to vote in Conservatives, because even when Liberals try to implement conservative ideas, they don't get it quite right. But we put forward constructive proposals around housing. In my role as Shadow Minister for Jobs, we put forward the Conservative Youth Jobs Plan. We did it weeks before the budget. We made an announcement on Parliament Hill saying, these are our specific ideas with detailed proposals around fixing immigration and unleashing the economy, but also getting homes built where the jobs are through an accelerated capital cost write-off, and around fixing training, offering relatively more generous student grants to those pursuing studies in areas that are in demand for the labor market. So we've put forward a series of constructive policy proposals to the government in a generous spirit, inviting Kevin to think about these ideas and to implement them. We've also used the tools of Parliament to put forward what are called concurrence motions. And this is a way of proposing constructive ideas that come out of committees and facilitating debate in the House on those ideas. So concurrence motions are a way of convening a 3-hour debate in Parliament on issues that are important and issues that come out of committees. So think we might have disrupted the live stream, but those who are here are still enjoying it, so that's okay. The other thing we've done is we've pursued investigations into government corruption. And I know Kevin, as a member of the Liberal Caucus, benefits from knowing when the executive branch is engaging in reprehensible, corrupt behavior. And we put forward motions that are in particular aimed at getting access to documents so that that parliamentarians and the RCMP and others can make use of those documents. So we have been a pointed and effective opposition in the work that we've done, using the opportunity to put motions before Parliament, pursuing investigations into government corruption, holding members of the executive accountable. We've been so effective in our role that some members of the government have resigned at certain times as a result of the corruption that we've helpfully been able to point out. And I think while fulfilling our constitutional responsibilities and putting forward constructive proposals, we've done the job Canadians want us to do. Sometimes, occasionally, we agree with government legislation and we support it. Sometimes, often, we don't. This is the role of opposition, and I'm proud of the work we do to fulfill it.
I'm going to say on the other side of this one here, and if we take a look at it, first, a quick comment on the grant. Let's be perfectly clear. When it comes to doctors and nurses, our healthcare workers, it is the province that is ultimately responsible for recognizing credentials. The money that the federal government put into the budget is to enable and hopefully work with the different provinces and territories in getting credentials recognized. Without the support of the stakeholders, it ain't gonna happen. Now, let me pick up in terms of this whole destructive force on the floor of the House of Commons. That's what I witnessed far too often. The only real exception to that was actually during the by-election for Mayor Poilievre, because we actually passed legislation back in June. True. Flashback to this time last year. This time last year, what you saw was concurrence motions, endless points of orders, and privileges. You don't have to take my word for it. Take a look at the debates. It was all designed for one purpose: to prevent anything that the government wants to get passed through the House of Commons to be passed. It prevented it. And that's why I've often said that the Conservative Party, and they're unique to it, not the NDP or the Bloc, but the Conservative Party continues to play a destructive force on the floor of the House of Commons far too often. It literally shut everything down last year. Now, if you take a look at this year, reflect back on the last election. In the last election, we talked a lot about trade, Trump, and the tariffs issue, and we want to build Canada strong. But there was another issue people are concerned about: the issue of bail reform. Bail reform is not just federal responsibility. It has all three levels of government: the police, City of Winnipeg, our courts and judges and so forth. Often it's the province of Manitoba. The criminal code, it's Ottawa. We recognize the bail reform is necessary. That's why the Prime Minister made an election commitment to bring in substantial bail reform legislation. And we did just that. Bill C-14. Bill C-14 deals with what Canadians are asking for. We have endless stakeholders, law enforcement, to councillors, many stakeholders that are saying, and Canadians saying, we want this legislation. You know how difficult it is just to get it on a second reading? If an opposition party doesn't want to allow legislation to go through, all they have to do is just stand up and speak.
1 minute.
And if they don't want to speak about the legislation, then they'll bring in a concurrence report in order to prevent any government agenda from being talked about. There are endless concurrence reports. You can do it every day. You never hear a Conservative Party bring up a concurrence report during an opposition day when they get to decide what's going to be debated that day. You know how frustrating it is when you know Canadians want bail reform, when Canadians want the tax break, Bill C4, a tax break for Canadians, getting rid of the first home builders purchase program. You kind of stumbled through that one, but the GST, thank you, Jeanette. You know, these are important, substantial pieces of legislation, yet you get the opposition wanting to talk and talk or bring in concurrence reports, anything to prevent it from going into committee when Canadians and other stakeholders will be provided the opportunity to provide their direct input. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lamoureux. Mr. Genuis.
Thank you. Lots to unpack there. So concurrence reports provide a short, limited opportunity for Parliament to debate ideas that are proposed by parliamentary committees. And Kevin in particular seems to think that any debate on work that's proposed by parliamentary committees is somehow illegitimate or shouldn't happen. I think it's an important part of the process. He mentioned Bill C4, and you can find the record on this. Liberals were filibustering their own legislation, Bill C4, in the Finance Committee. They were doing it because I think they were concerned about some amendment that might come forward. I'm not exactly sure why. The point is, they were filibustering their own legislation there. We've supported C4, but one other thing to understand about the process, the way the day is organized in Parliament is that the government has complete discretion on scheduling what is debated on a given date in Parliament. There are opposition days. They decide when those take place. They decide which bills are debated when. So you have this routine that plays out sometimes where the government says, okay, we've got this legislation on bail and we want it to pass. Well, if they want it to pass, they need to schedule it for a certain number of days so it can be thoroughly debated. But if they prioritize scheduling, if they say, okay, we want this bill, we're going to schedule nothing but this bill until the debate is finished, then debate will finish and it will proceed to committee. But very often this game is played by the government where they say, we want this bill to pass, we want this bill to pass. Well, schedule it then. If they don't schedule it, they schedule something else. And I have to say on Bill C14, the government has, as far as I've seen, been scheduling other legislation over C14 quite consistently. But let's talk more broadly about the issue of bail changes. And this is very important. So again, I'll come back to something I've said on a few other issues. 2015 was a pivot point in this country. Up until 2015, we had a declining rate of violent crime. After 2015, violent crime began to increase. And it was because after 2015, the Liberal government brought in changes to make it much, much easier to get bail. So we have repeat violent offenders who are getting out on bail. We have problems with productivity in the private sector, but we have criminals who are too productive. We have the same people that are committing crimes over and over again because they commit crimes and they get out on bail and they commit more crimes later in the day. Now, we have said that what is needed quite specifically is to reverse Liberal bail, to reverse the changes that Liberals brought in with respect to bail. Now, C14 makes some changes, but it does not go the full distance. And Conservatives put forward a private member's bill, Bill C242, by my colleague Arpan Khanna, the jail not bail bill that actually does the work that is required, that reverses the Liberal bail changes, and that is important. So we put forward an opposition motion that would have had the House adopt Bill C242. So the government could have supported that bill, and that would have been a much quicker way to get the right solutions. In any event, if the government wants Bill C14 to pass more quickly, the government needs to choose to schedule it instead of scheduling other items, and it's up to them to control the schedule. Finally, I want to talk about this dispute we had about a year ago, because this is an important issue. We had a debate in Parliament on a question of privilege. And here's where this came from. Parliament, in the majority, adopted a motion to order the production of certain documents in relation to the Liberal Green Slush Fund scandal. Now, it is well-established constitutional law that Parliament has the right to order the production of documents. In order for it to do its job, underlining the principle of legislative control of the executive, Parliament can order the production of documents, and we did this. The government defied the law, refused to hand those documents over. So we appealed to the Speaker, actually a Speaker who was elected as a Liberal, Greg Fergus, and we appealed to him to say, the the government has to hand over these documents. It is a violation of the privileges of Parliament for them not to hand over these documents. And Greg Fergus agreed. He ruled that the Liberal government had to hand over these documents. But in violation of the law, they refused to hand over the documents. So we said we will continue to debate this issue of privilege until the government complies with the law. And Liberals consistently behave as if they are above the law, but they are not. They have to follow the law. And as soon as they handed over these documents, the privilege question would have ended and Parliament would have gotten back to other business. But we have a responsibility to hold the government accountable to follow the law. So if Kevin wanted to get back to other business last fall, he has to explain why his government violated the law and refused to hand over those documents.
Some people can't hear, so just go in front of the mic a little bit more.
That's okay. At the end of the day, what I want to focus my attention on is the proceedings that take place on the floor of the House of Commons, because that affects all of us. Doesn't matter what side of the room that you might actually be on. I suspect most of you are somewhat neutral. At the end of the day, we have a minority government. That means the government cannot do anything unless it has the support of at least some opposition amendments. That is absolutely critical. My objective is to try to get the initiatives that the government has brought forward to get it through the House of Commons, because I believe that that is my responsibility, as it is for my colleagues. At the end of the day, there is substantial legislation that would have a profoundly positive impact on the communities in which we all live in. So if you want to talk about jobs, you want to talk about feeling safe in the community, you want to talk about our future and providing hope, you need to see things proceed through the House of Commons. There is legislation that is there. It's real. It's tangible. It'll have a profoundly positive impact on all regions of our country. That's what Canadians voted for in the last election. Cooperation. And we do cooperate. At times, things get very difficult, but we continuously look to have others support what it is the government has on the floor. And you will find that that is the case with the legislation that we have before us. But when Garnett says that the government sets the agenda, well, we say what's going to happen that day. But it's a little bit misleading in the sense that all you have to do is, after question period during routine proceedings, stand up and say, I want to debate X topic as a concurrence report. And then say, well, you know what? This is like really, really important. So we can't debate what the government wants to debate today. Rather, we're going to debate this thing because it's really, really important. If it was really, really important, then why didn't they use it as an opposition day? Every opposition party, official party, is given opposition days, which end with a vote. So if you're serious about the issue that you're using to filibuster to prevent the government getting its legislation, if you're really serious about that issue, then why didn't you bring it up as an opposition day? Let's not try to kid Canadians. It is meant to filibuster. It's meant to prevent legislation from passing. That is the truth. And yes, I get upset over it because at the end of the day, there is substantial legislation. Talk to your neighbors. How many of them will give you an expression of frustration in terms of community safety? Listen to the radio when they talk about violent repeat offenders. We have legislation there that's ready to go to committee. I'm not even saying they have to pass it, just allow it to get to committee. There's substantial pieces of legislation. I made reference to the first-time home buyer GST. Well, that is in Bill C4. The tax break for 22 million Canadians, that's in Bill C4. putting into law abolishing the carbon tax? That is in Bill C4. Take a look in terms of the England Treaty. That's going to enhance trading opportunities for Canadian businesses. You know, the number one export to England is actually gold. You would be amazed in terms of how much gold Canada exports. And England is a customer, a serious customer. They need Canadian gold. We are happy to sell it to them. Virtually every province almost mines gold. These are the types of legislation that are being held up at that committee stage, or not even going to committee. And that's why it's important that all political parties recognize that they too were elected for the betterment of Canadians, and they do need to allow things to pass. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lamoureux. Mr. Genuis, your concluding statement.
I just have to say, like, the changes in Bill C4 are already in effect through a Ways and Means motion. The Canada-UK trade deal bill has not even been scheduled once, as far as I know. Maybe on a Friday, but I don't think it's been scheduled once yet for debate. So we're being accused of holding up legislation that the government has not seen it as a priority to schedule even once for debate. It is the government's responsibility every day. They get to decide what matter is debated in Parliament that day. I will just say on concurrence motions, there seems to be either a misunderstanding or a bit of confusion in how it's being presented. So concurrence motions are only on matters that have already been endorsed and adopted by a parliamentary committee. So if you have a parliamentary committee that adopts a motion to refer a report to the House of Commons, then and only then can a motion be moved for a short 3-hour debate on that specific issue. It is reflective of the work that all party parliamentary committees do. So we recently had a debate on the problem of youth unemployment because there was a report from my committee highlighting the problem of youth unemployment and calling for action on it. And that precipitated a debate in the House of Commons on the issue of youth unemployment. And if that debate hadn't happened, there would not have been a debate on youth unemployment. In fact, we asked the government to schedule a take-note debate in the evening on youth unemployment. That would have been outside of regular hours. So it would not have been at a time when otherwise government legislation would have been debated. And I would suggest to you that if the House leader had been more willing, on the government side, more willing to allow a debate on youth unemployment, it would have been less necessary to proceed with that concurrence report. But concurrence is an important and legitimate tool for discussing key public issues that are endorsed by committees. Now, on the issue of getting legislation through the House, I agree. Part of Parliament's job is to study carefully legislation, to determine whether or not it's good legislation, and then to vote on it. You could see in the course of history bad bills that have been passed, and sometimes bad bills were passed in a climate where there was a real climate of pressure. This is a great bill. It's really important. Let's get it through quickly because we need it right now. Well, the role of Parliament is considered deliberation over time. It is to be the deliberative assembly of one nation, not a mob, which is why we always need to take necessary time to consider legislation, to evaluate whether or not it's good, to work it through the process. To take an idea that on the face of it might sound wonderful to everyone, but actually to go to the trouble of understanding what the consequences of the provisions are. So yes, our responsibility is to get legislation through the House after and through a process of appropriate study. And to have that study happen, the government needs to schedule bills that are a priority for them, and then we debate them, we study them, and we make determinations on them.
Statement.
I think it's really important. Let's go back to the concurrence reports. Think in terms of the legislative agenda. Garnett says that youth was a very important issue. We wanted to debate it. Well, nothing prevented the Conservative Party from bringing in an opposition day motion to debate that issue. We're actually debating the budget today. Nothing prevents them from debating the youth issue during the budget debate also. Imagine if you were to have a debate. We have like 20 plus standing committees. They all provide reports. Can you imagine if every of those committees said, well, we want to have a debate on the floor of the House of Commons? You know, I think there would be more credibility if you had a consensus, not a majority, because you're in a minority, a consensus from a committee saying we would like to have a debate and maybe approach them for a late show debate or something of that nature. Do not be fooled. A concurrence report that's being brought in, like it has been, is meant for one purpose only: to prevent government business from being debated. There's a finite amount of time. Last year we asked, can we stand up and sit later in the evening? So instead of going from 6 o'clock, let's go to midnight. You won't guess which political party would say no to that. How many Canadians actually work late into the evening? I was prepared to sit late. I sit a lot inside the chamber. And I can tell you, I would have sat till midnight if it means getting things through the House. But we're being denied that opportunity too. Why? Because they don't want legislation to ultimately pass. And we have to fight tooth and nail to get something done. I have a list of legislation, C4, affordability measures, which made reference to. It wasn't the Ukraine-Canada trade agreement. It's the trade agreement with England. And at the end of the day, I know, and just like the bail reform legislation, I stood up on how many occasions, and I have said that at least give a commitment that will pass the legislation by the end of the year. I get sympathy coming from the other side, but no commitment. And that's to the end of the year. If you allow it to get out of committee, you still, out of second reading, you still go to committee. At the end of the day, unfortunately at times, the Conservatives are a destructive force inside the House of Commons. And the House of Commons is one of our fundamental principles of democracy. And that is why all of us should be offended by what takes place in the House of Commons at times. Thank you.
Thank you, both speakers. No punch below the belt. I'm very happy to hear. I've been there. So we're at the Q&A period. I was going to say form a line, but it would be a little bit switched. So how about people just raise their hands and I'll pick someone. Oh, so many good options. You there in the green overshirt. Yep.
It's neutral or
Just you can ask the MPs or
yeah. I mean, this is the question for Mr. Genuis. Sure, Genuis. Yeah, yes. I just want to say I really appreciated going in here and talking a lot about 2015 and everything. I felt like my social studies class. That being said, we talked a lot about the years as if it's some sort of golden era. I think it's really strange that we spent a lot of time advocating for Stephen Harper. I didn't know he was running to be a prime minister or but it's funny that I didn't mention your current leader's track record. So I just wanted to go through a few of the points there. So
is there a question in there?
Okay. Sure. Yeah, I'll summarize them super quick. So, sold off 800,000 public housing units, advocated for free markets, which sounds good. I hope you're not running. Yes, wait for it.
Question time.
Oh.
Sure. My question is, at the end of the day, your party has failed on affordability. Your party has failed on offering solutions for public housing. It seems like you failed to support labor whenever it's actually important, and seem to support immigration when it's convenient. And on the topic of veterans, you guys failed to support veterans. You failed to support a number of bills that support veterans affairs.
Is there a question in there?
And so my question is, as a young person, thanks guys, I know critical thinking is hard. As a young person, homeowner perspective, maybe it's the way you guys feel. Why should a young person trust your party to form government and act in our interests?
All right, Peter, respond.
Thanks for coming and thanks for asking your question. It won't surprise you that I quarrel with most of the premises you laid out. Look, but just going back to how you started, I think it's pretty clear in the numbers, the cost of housing, the deficit, the taxes, productivity growth, business investment, critically the youth unemployment rate. how much rent costs, these things that matter so much to young people. It's clear where we were prior to 2015, and it's clear that 2015 was a pivot point because of a suite of radical policies pursued by this Liberal government. And folks are welcome to look at those numbers and look at the economic circumstances people experience now relative to where we were. It's not even just a contrast between sort of the Carney Trudeau years and the Harper years. It's certain matters of economic policy that had actually become a multi-party consensus. This sense that you sort of needed to balance the budget was not something that was unique to Conservatives prior to 2015. There were matters of common sense economic policy that were shared by other political actors. And then the Trudeau-Carney Liberals took us in a radically different direction. And I think it's clear in the numbers. And I think it's clear in the conversations I have with young people on campuses across this country when I ask the simple question, are you better or worse off than your parents' generation? And most young people I talk to feel that they are worse off than their parents' generation. And this wasn't the case with these perceptions 10 years ago. And I think we can change those perceptions, but it is clearly where we are now. I'm just going to cheat and say one of the problems with sitting late is because there are finite resources in Parliament, and you know this, Kevin. When Parliament sits late, that crowds out the ability of committees to sit. If we didn't have the problems with resources that we've had since you brought in the virtual Parliament, then we wouldn't have these same constraints. But you can't get translators to have committees sit if the House is also sitting. That's been a major challenge, the competition for resources, which is something you have to take into consideration when you're saying it's not so simple as saying, are you prepared to work late? It's that if you have the translators in one room, they can't be in another.
Okay, so I'll leave about 30 seconds for you to do your question. If you don't have your question in 30 seconds, I'm skipping you. Okay, I'll be giving 2 minutes for each person to respond to whoever it is. Anyone have a question for Lamoureux? You in the white shirts.
So I really want to touch on symptom versus cause thinking. And I know that this is kind of being a little generic, but to me, it's a really big differential in between the policies that the Conservatives promote and those that the Liberals do. And so earlier on, you had brought up the National School Food Program. And I think every single person in this room can agree that it's not good for children to go hungry, right? However, the National School Food Program is a symptom. It's not addressing the cause, which would be the affordability measures, jobs, all of those things. And so I'm curious on your thoughts or comments when it comes to the fact that instead of lowering some of those costs, the government's answer is always another program or another subsidy that requires even more taxpayer money. And so how does that not to you in the long term end up creating a cycle of government dependency whereby the government is almost encouraged to increase the pain by avoiding addressing the cause and then offers itself as the only cure while criticizing everybody else who really just wants to fix the cause so that kids don't need to rely on the government programs to feed them in school?
Could you summarize that question?
Actually, I think it's a great question. I appreciate it very much. What we have to appreciate, I believe, is that I don't know if you ever recall my name is Sharon Carstairs. Sharon Carstairs was a leader of the official opposition back in 1989, 1988. And she, at the time, used to talk about children. She was a teacher by profession. And she would say that there's too many children in Manitoba classrooms that are hungry. And it's not, in many ways, I should say, it's because of the home environment. Maybe it's a dysfunctional family. The bottom line is that you have children in schools that are not having breakfast for whatever reason. And that has been a generational issue. And it's not going to disappear. There's nothing that you can do. It might be a relatively small core number. But in order to provide children the opportunity to learn on a full stomach, I think that is so critically important. I'm very proud of the fact that Mark Carney has actually recognized the value of education in ensuring that every child has the opportunity to learn in a classroom on a full summer. I think that's absolutely critical. There are vast majority don't necessarily need it, but there's a certain percentage that do need it. And I think that there is an obligation, because it's not just in one province and another province. I would argue that it's throughout. I used to be the education critic here in the province of Manitoba, and I can tell you that it is a program that is needed. Manitoba, as a province, jumped all over it. We have provincial buy-in to the program. So I think it's programs like that that show the difference, the contrast between Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre. The Conservatives have said, we had one Conservative that said it's nothing but a garbage program. That's a quote from the floor of the House of Commons. I believe in good, sound public policy where we can benefit, i.e. the dental program for seniors. For the first time, we actually have seniors that are getting dental work because of a national program.
Seconds.
That's the type of things in which I think show contrast between the Liberals and the Conservatives. Thanks for the question.
Thank you.
Genuis, I keep on saying your last name wrong. You did it before the next. You're the red sweater.
When will Pierre Poilievre stop being a control freak and get a security clearance?
Oh, nice and short, I like it.
To the point. I'm bold.
I mean, I guess I'll address the security clearance question. I mean, I think this has been addressed repeatedly by Pierre in his own comments, which is that the job of the official opposition is not to make executive decisions. It is to hold the government accountable. And people in government obviously need access to that information in order to make decisions about how to exercise the executive power of government. But if you are security cleared as a member of the opposition, you have access to information which you cannot use because you're not in an executive position. You cannot speak about, and you're therefore constraining your ability to hold government accountable. So this whole argument is, I think, an effort to manipulate some of the realities around these rules. Now, we have within our Conservative caucus people who are on NSICOP, which is a security committee of parliamentarians, and they are able to provide advice to the government. But they are very constrained in speaking about these issues, because when you have security clearance, the government still decides what information you see. It's not as if you can go in and demand access to certain things. They still decide what you see and don't see. And you are then constrained in your ability to speak about those issues. Now, since I have 35 seconds left in the 2 minutes, when it comes to the school food program, look, there have been school food programs in this country for a very long time. They have been delivered by school boards, by provinces, by local not-for-profits. The question is, do we need a federal bureaucracy that is overseeing locally run school food programs? The question is not about whether you think school food is a good idea. The question is not even about whether you think school food programs should exist. The question is whether you think 330 people in Ottawa should be hiring bureaucrats who are regulating school food programs that exist here in Manitoba. That's the question, and that's what's at issue.
You guys are so eager up here. I know you want to have okay.
I want to go back to the topic of immigration. Most of the passed on the aims to change the rules around citizenship by descent, specifically around allowing Canadians born abroad to more easily claim citizenship. Given that this could increase the amount for services and possibly change immigration patterns, how do you see this affecting the federal budget and taxation burden on Canadians? What safeguards would you support to ensure that expanding citizenship doesn't lead to unexpected fiscal pressure that young workers will have to carry?
Which one of you wants to respond first?
First of all, what you're making reference to is legislation that we ultimately passed. And I guess what's important to recognize here is that you have the Bloc, the Green, the NDP, the Conservatives, and the Liberals that make up the House of Commons. only one political party actually opposed the legislation. And that's the issue that they consistently brought up. And I totally disagree with it. People, if you take a look at the third reading debate, you will find in that debate that there were conservative members that still didn't know what it is that was being talked about. You'll see that in the debate. Look it up yourself. Third reading on citizenship. And you will find it's very straightforward. Imagine, if you will, I have, purely hypothetical, my daughter is actually here. Let's say I am a federal civil servant and I'm in foreign affairs and I get a posting out to Germany. While in Germany, I have a beautiful baby girl and I call her Cindy. Well, Cindy decides after many years that she wants to be able to stay in England or in Germany. And as a result, when she has a child, if she is not successful at providing substantial contact to Canada, that child will not be able to become a citizen of Canada. But if she can provide substantial contact to Canada, then my grandchild would actually be classified as a Canadian citizen. I see absolutely nothing wrong with that. If you have someone that immigrates to Canada, the naturalization process is 1,095 days. That's the same thing in terms of substantial connection to Canada. I see it as a positive thing. And so would the other thing.
If you have a question for both MPs, I will be giving them just 1 minute each to respond to, just to keep it fair for those who ask one question, they get 2 minutes. But I'll give you the two just because I gave them the favor.
Okay, so the core question with Bill C3 is, should you be able to pass citizenship on infinitely to children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, even if you are outside of the country? Now, the pre-existing law prior to C3 was that if I move outside the country, if I have a child there, that child is a Canadian citizen. But if that child has children and we are still living outside of the country, at that point, it's fair to say that we have moved away from Canada and we have become part of a different society. Now, if you are on a foreign mission, if you are traveling back and forth, it's very easy to say, okay, well, there are different cases you can look at where you say, okay, this makes sense in this case does. But the problem with the Liberal legislation they put forward, the C3, is that it would, in practice, allow somebody who has left the country, been outside of the country for generations, to continue to pass citizenship on to every successive generation. My grandparents came from Malta. It's a great place. I have a certain cultural affinity for Malta and interest in it. But I'm not a Maltese citizen anymore. I'm not part of that community of people. I am part of this community of people. I am involved in this country's politics. I pay taxes here. I work here. This is where I have the substantial connection. So I think it is reasonable to have some kind of a generational cutoff. And apparently Liberals don't. We were asked the cost implications of this. You asked what are the cost implications. The reality is we don't know, because the government couldn't answer basic questions about how many people were affected by this. So yes, there could be very significant cost implications when people who are passing citizenship along in this way come back asking for public services. It's a big question the government cannot have an answer to.
You in the purple tie. Yep.
If it's okay for both, I can handle it.
Just do one.
Just do one. Okay. Today, well, we acknowledge a lot of issues today, but one that presses a lot on the youth's mind and obviously the wallets is housing. The Liberal plan has been somewhat positive in housing investments, millions of dollars. However, there's a lot of investments being focused on either private investments, apartments, or big mansions, if you know that term. Now, for young people, they can't afford any of that, or they're unwilling to afford it. They're stuck in their basements. What can we kind of offer them? What kind of plans and projects and investments can we offer young people in housing in Canada?
Mario, you ready to respond?
Yeah. I think it's important, again, you're talking about a great deal of contrast between the two political entities. When you look at the Build Canada Fund, we are investing generational amounts towards nonprofit housing and the development of private housing, working with the different stakeholders. What we have seen in the past is there is a great need for the federal government to play a strong role in housing. That has not always been the case. And Mark Carney has made very clear by establishing an agency that ultimately is going to be working with the stakeholders, ensuring that we are doubling the number of homes that are going to get built. Now, the types of homes will vary. I suspect even from community to community because of issues like price points, the types of situations, housing co-ops, for example. We're investing in housing co-ops. Housing co-ops is a wonderful alternative to actually owning a home. You're a resident as opposed to being a tenant in an apartment block, for example. In working with the province and the city in terms of how it is that we can ensure that we have things for low-income individuals, providing incentives for individuals, private sector, to ensure that we see, hopefully, what I would classify as an explosion of housing construction, because that's really what's necessary. I've heard the Prime Minister and others talk about, looking at the war and coming out of the war, how the government invested into housing.
10 seconds.
Contrast that to when Pierre Poilievre was the Minister of Housing. He built 6 houses. We don't know where they are. He built 6 houses. Completely different.
That's time. You in the back there with the mask on.
Thank you. I'd like to thank both of you for coming out to the debate. In the past, both the red and the blue parties have constricted elected members to say publicly. Thank you both for coming here. I heard both of you say that you agree on the need to increase the amount of money coming into the federal government. I want to ask you whether you were aware of a repeated problem with Canada's intellectual property laws, usually in a capitalist system, generates intellectual property, and then those
30 seconds.
Countries. So we have the problem of countries like China.
Is there a question in there?
Yeah.
Okay.
To states look at intellectual property. My question is whether both of you were aware of this or changing Canada's intellectual property laws.
Is that for both or just for him?
Both.
Okay, that'll be 1 minute each. Go for it.
Well, thank you for the question. I'm very concerned about intellectual property theft by CCP affiliated actors. I'm concerned about Chinese state interference in our country in a broad range of areas, interference on campus, industrial espionage. I've been targeted for foreign interference because of my advocacy on human rights issues involving the PRC. And this is why I'm very concerned about some of the rhetoric we see out of the Liberal government in general. They, under a lot of pressure from us, passed foreign interference legislation, which they have still more than a year later failed to fully implement. Now they're talking about a strategic partnership with the government of China. Mark Carney once said that the greatest threat we faced was from the Chinese Communist Party. Now he's talking about a strategic partnership with the same actors. This is very concerning. We need to keep the protection of Canadians, protection of our intellectual property, and protection of Canadians at the forefront of what we do.
In many ways, it's important that Canada look at its allies, in particular our Five Eyes countries, and that we all see the value in terms of protecting the intellectual property rights and making sure that our laws and regulations are there and they're relatively equal to what we see in our allied countries, and that is something in which You know, if you have some specifics, I'd be very much interested in hearing those specifics. But working with allied countries is one of the ways in which we can. China is a bit of an issue for us. I remember, you know, seeing videos where you get these huge piles of DVDs, and they're all coming in from China. So there are some serious issues. There's no doubt about that. But I want to pick up on, it's called foreign interference. The security clearance, the leader of the NEP, the leader of the Green Party, the leader of the Bloc Party, none of them had a problem in getting a security clearance. Only Pierre Poilievre does.
Mr. Genuis, you in the blue.
Thank you. I do want to just give credit to Mr. Lamoureux quick. It's not often that when a Liberal tells me to do something, I'll listen. But you said to do Googling, and I did some Googling. My family home that I was born in cost $90,000 in 2003. That same house was just listed in Selkirk for $400,000. We got to hear the Liberal side of the housing plan to help municipalities and help bring down the cost. I would like to hear the Conservative side so that we as an entire room can see both sides of what the parties want to offer to help us Canadians.
Free to start.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've seen from the Liberals is more money thrown at bureaucracies without actually incentivizing and demanding results. And what we have put forward is a clear plan that retains the autonomy of local actors, but also requires the achievement of certain targets around housing construction in line with federal funding that's provided. So we will tie existing federal funds that are transferred to municipalities to their ability to meet housing targets. If they fall below those targets, they will lose in transfers from the federal government. If they exceed those targets, they will receive a bonus. This is to connect existing funding to the realization of those targets. Now, what the Liberals have done instead of that is to pour more money into additional bureaucracies without actually requiring results in the way that the Conservative Party proposes to do it. And we have recognized the need for more housing construction to meet the needs. We've also said in connection with transit funding that we should be requiring, and the federal government is funding new transit, there should be housing around on all sides and above that new construction. These are parts of the concrete process. We put forward proposals around repurposing of federal buildings, selling off federal lands. These things all together are part of recognizing that a core problem in housing has been the cost of government. Governments at all levels have imposed costs on new home construction that have held us back from realizing the objectives we need. So we need to remove gatekeepers, get government out of the way, and that means having federal leadership and associating with the dollars that are already being spent. Again, we didn't have these problems to nearly the same degree before 2015. We can solve them. We put forward plans to go back to what's before then where housing was affordable.
You in the black sweater.
Thank you. Mr. Lamoureux, you mentioned that the provinces were the main barrier for not implementing a Blue Seal program during your time in government. You've been in government since 2015. I just wanted to remind you that Stephen Theon, Nova Scotia, Liberal. Philippe Couillard, Quebec, Liberal. Kathleen Wynne, Ontario, Liberal. Prince Edward Island, Robert Gates, Liberal. New Brunswick, Brian Gallant, Liberal. Newfoundland, White Falls, Liberal. BC, Christy Clark, Liberal, and 2 NDP premiers. What was the problem working with those allied premiers to implement such programs?
Really, truly do. And part of the issue is they are. The reality is, at the end of the day, we have tens of thousands of healthcare workers that are not getting their credentials recognized. What I have pointed out is that we need to be honest with everyone. You know, don't look to Ottawa. Ottawa cannot implement a so-called Blue Seal program to mandate that every doctor that came from X is now going to be a doctor here in Canada. That's not going to happen. In order to be able to deal with it, you don't have a choice. You've got to work through the provinces. We're not going to pass a law or say to the provinces, you have to do it. Imagine what response we would get from the provinces. You know, provinces have changed political stripes in every province. None of them have really dealt with the issue. That's why with Mark Carney, what he is proposing is he's actually put a pot of money to the side in hopes that we will actually be able to make some headway in that area. It's the provinces that have the associations, the universities, the professional organizations that are out there. So if you want to deal with the issue, it's got to be the provinces. I'm not going to defend the provinces and their lack of action on it. I understand why it is that in many ways that they don't do it. It doesn't necessarily mean that I support them doing it. If it was up to me and if I was the premier of the province of Manitoba, I would be working at getting rid of those barriers. The nice thing about the Build Canada, One Canada, is that you should be able to be a doctor in Manitoba and be able to practice your medicine in any province. Bringing down barriers like that, and we've got a high sense of cooperation with the provinces, might be a starting point in which we see others.
You in the back, standing there.
Awesome. Yes. So my question is, Genuis.
Give it up at this point.
We're talking about how there is the third parties trying to bring more of a consensus on immigration, right? So under Stephen Harper's birthright citizenship was never on the table. But Michelle Gardner, the credit for IRCC, introduced legislation to amend the Citizenship Act, meaning people that are born to temporary residence or people on a visitor visa can no longer obtain citizenship by birthright, right? And she quoted that one of the reasons she was proposing citizenship was square two rate, which is only stand 1.5%. So my question is really approved this for to appeal to this base and survive the leadership review? And is he aware of the consequences that can have on a societal level, which means an increase in xenophobia?
Okay, maybe just to clarify. So we absolutely need to respond to the challenges that we are seeing emerging in the country. And I think that prior to 2015, we had an immigration system that was working well on a lot of fronts, and I've made the case for that. And there was a strong public consensus for that. Now there is growing concern about the performance of the immigration system because it has been broken by the Liberals. So let's talk about this issue of birth tourism, birthright citizenship, right? It doesn't have to be a large percentage of total births to still be a problem, right? If let me put it to you and to others in this room, just as a point of principle, right? If you think someone who happens to be in Canada for a very short time, let's take the extreme case, right? They're on a stopover, right? Like they're flying from San Francisco to London and the plane touches down in Calgary because it needs to refuel or something. And they happen to have a baby. Well, and I know this is a little bit of a, but let's just take this as a case example. Do you think that baby should be a Canadian citizen by virtue of the fact that they happen to be born on Canadian soil while their plane is touching down? No, I think most reasonable people would say, well, probably not in that case. Now, on the other hand, if somebody's parents are living in this country long term and the child is born in Canada, of course they should be a citizen. But can we say where the reasonable line is between those, without getting hyperbolic about xenophobia, and say, like, is it reasonable that somebody whose mother is in this country for a matter of minutes or hours or weeks and gives birth, should that child automatically become a Canadian citizen? I think most reasonable people would say there's room for a reasonable discussion about where that limit should be.
That's done. Again, the orange shirts.
Thank
thank you both for coming. We had a public administration class across the hall and decided to come over.
Sorry, use the question board. Okay.
We're all from the public administration program, and we're looking at reviewing this budget and discussing the substantial cuts to the public service. How can you justify the cuts to the federal public service, especially as the IRCC, CRA, and other departments are facing scrutiny for failing performance? And at the same time, this budget seems to cater to American funding demands, referencing increased funding for the border security and military, which arguably do not benefit Canadians domestically as much as fund public services.
I appreciate the question very much. At the end of the day, there are some very difficult decisions that have to be made in the budget. And I would encourage more discussion and dialogue regarding the budget. As MPs, you'll find they're very much interested in what people actually have to say about the document itself. When you think of those decisions, it was, when we look in terms of where there's a need for us to hire additional support, we talked about 1,000 new RCMP officers. We've talked about 1,000 new border control agents in terms of making it a priority to securing our borders, dealing with other issues that are related to our border, or dealing with issues with the RCMP and the issue of safety. When you think in terms of the overall size of the civil service, it has grown quite a bit in the last decade. And we need to acknowledge that, whether it's through the pandemic, other issues that came out over the last 10 years. And there was a general feeling that we needed to cut back the size of the civil service that we had allowed to grow to a significant size. I think it was a responsible approach. It's, I believe, over a 3-year period of time. And we're looking at ways that will marginalize the impact of the civil service. In other words, to be sensitive to where we have to looking at laying off, whether it's buyout packages, individuals that are retiring, not placing them, looking at empty slots that are empty, and looking at realigning where a civil servant actually might be working. We have the best civil service, I would argue, in the world. Many other countries come to Canada to see how we operate our civil service. And I think at the end of the day, we're not going to do anything that severs or causes issue with Canada's reputation in protecting our first-class civil servants. Thank you.
Just 2 more. You are the best, the best.
Me?
You, no, Bluster. Yep.
Okay. This is a question for both of you on bail reform. So we acknowledge that it's both a federal, provincial, and a municipal issue. So we're going out making changes to the bail reform at the federal side of things. When I speak to RCMP officers, civic police officers, and crown attorneys, they're saying roughly 75% of all cases that are brought forward to the crown attorneys are dropped for other reasons. Some of those reasons are our prisons are at 102.3% capacity. We do not have enough crown attorneys, and we do not have enough court system capacity to handle this. So you can change the rules.
That's 30 seconds.
What will you do on the other end?
Yeah, thank you for that question. My brother's a crown attorney, and we talk often about sort of the intricacies of the interaction between different areas of responsibility. I think if we were holding accountable repeat violent offenders, and that's an area we can address at the federal level, if we were holding accountable repeat violent offenders, we wouldn't have the same pressures on the capacities of our court system. So that's, that's one part of it. I know that there are ways these challenges need to be engaged at all levels, but our responsibility, criminal code, sentencing, and if we can address the issues around bail legislation, repeat violent offenders, I think we will be much further ahead. The other is we have put forward constructive proposals as Conservatives on addressing reducing recidivism. We have a private member's bill from my colleague Kelly DeRitter that allows judges to order offenders to go through courses of training or rehabilitation. We need to do a better job at addressing rehabilitation because we have a problem with too many offenders reoffending.
bail reform is something in which, we had taken very seriously coming out of the last election. The Prime Minister made it very clear, we bring in substantial bail reform legislation. It's before the House. I'm hoping, praying, that ultimately we'll get the Conservatives to allow it to pass before the end of the year. There's no reason why it cannot pass, unless, well, they'll go there. But at the end of the day, let's realize, as it's been pointed out, it's not just Ottawa. You have to have the city at the table. You've got to have the provinces at the table, the different stakeholders that are out there. And that's what's so encouraging about C14, the wide spectrum of support. But we all need to come to the table. There has to be more investments in Crown tourism. Talk to the crowds here in the province of Manitoba. Talk to the mayor about policing. Combined, together we can make our communities safer, and that's what we're working towards.
You guys, you hosted the event. You already got your question. Up to you guys.
What do you want? We get a lineup still?
We get a lineup?
We should get a lineup.
Sure, yeah.
So,
It's 8:06 right now, so.
So what do you want? Like,
why don't we do 2 more questions?
and then like 3 or 4 minutes lineup?
Sure. Okay. Okay, you and the green investment factor.
Hi, guys. Thanks for joining us tonight. My question for Mr. Lamoureux, just around the U.S.-Canada trade deal. Just want some further understanding of that. Represents about 65% of our trade, $160 billion. Mr. Lamoureux, you mentioned earlier talks with the Philippines and the UK. Just wondering your perception on how that fills that gap. And then thirdly, just in terms of
That's 30 seconds.
Mr. Klein himself, I think it's on his 20th trip and he's had zero deals since we come to the government.
Is there a question next?
Any other question? Okay. First of all, no, we actually have legislation today dealing with England and Northern Ireland. And that is going to enhance opportunities for virtually every region of the country through trade opportunities. I think it's really important that we recognize, coming out of the election, there was an effort by the Prime Minister not only to look at the U.S.-Canada situation. Obviously, that's a core, it's absolutely essential, but I don't think you can put a time clock on it. Can you really predict Donald Trump and what he's going to say and do? I can't. At the end of the day, we have to ensure that we get the best deal we can for Canadians on that project. And if all we were doing is just waiting for that to occur, then I think we'd be open to all sorts of criticism. But we have a Prime Minister that has established all forms of relationships in Europe. And he has actually traveled to Europe to try to see how it is we can turn and enhance those relationships with European partners so that we can have more trade going between Europe. He's gone to Asia and spent a great deal of time. I was very pleased. People that understand the demographics of the province of Manitoba understand fully the size of our growing Filipino heritage community. It makes sense for us to have some sort of trade agreement. We want their coconut oil. We have opportunities to sell them pork, potatoes.
20 seconds.
These are the type of trade, expanding our trading opportunities means jobs. I do have a wonderful quote, 2.5, well, I'll save the quote for my life. Thank you.
You and the RRC,
This is another question for Mr. Lamoureux. So it was the same question that Genuis. And that is simply 140 the MPs that are sitting today were the same ones under Trudeau.
why should we trust your government when the only change is that you guys have a new mascot of Mark Carney? First of all, it's acknowledged. You know, it's not a mascot, I can assure you of that. There is a huge difference talking with Mark Carney than there is Justin Trudeau. In fact, if you look at it, what was his first action? Mark Carney's first action was to get rid of the carbon tax. How can you not say that that is different? And if you take a look at the Manitoba or the Liberal caucus today, Jeanette, correct me if I'm wrong, I think there's at least 60 new members of parliament. 60, that's one of them. Jeanette is one of them. So it's not just Mark Carney. It's the way in which we're dealing with the issues that we're facing today. That's what we need to recognize. And that's why when we talk about building Canada strong, I would challenge people to look at the contrast between the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party. Take a look at what it is that Mark Carney is saying, contrasted to what Pierre Poilievre is saying. Do you believe that there's a role for the national government to build a stronger and healthier economy and a society through social programs? I believe the answer to that is yes. That is in complete contrast in terms of what we see from Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives. A completely different. Is that good or bad? I think it's wonderful that we have discussions of this nature so that we can skip the social media, and sometimes there's misleading information out there, and get down to the nuts and bolts. And when we look at the nuts and bolts, I believe it's necessary for us to invest in our infrastructure, for us to invest in Canadians through good, sound public policies to support whether it's seniors or young people. There's a huge difference this time last year compared to today. Thank you for the question.
For 4 minutes, yes, we'll do that. And you're free to start.
All right, well, thank you. This has been a real pleasure, and I look forward to doing many more of these with Kevin at locations across the country. I think Winnipeg, we can do this. I think we both had a lot of fun, and we should do more of this. So, look, I agree that there is an aesthetic difference between Justin Trudeau and Mark Carney. One wears board shorts to the office, the other probably wears a suit to the beach. But the point is not about the aesthetic. The point is about the substance. And in 2015, we had the argument made by Liberals that more government spending, which we called investment, would lead to prosperity. It didn't work. It made us poorer. Now in 2025, we have the same argument being made by, for the most part, the same people. There have been some changes, but Kevin's still there, right? And many others. It's not just him. There are many others that are still there. And while this is going on, folks, the Liberals are doubling down on contradiction. I was very interested in the question asked by the gentleman at the back about the size of the public service. And it illustrates the instinct towards self-contradiction that runs deep with Liberals. It's not just elbows up and elbows down. It's not just spend less to invest more. But it's the fact that they want a more and more involved, busybody government that is regulating and touching every part of your life, while at the same time saying that they're going to reduce the size of the public service. At some point, if you say you're going to reduce the size of the public service that has exploded in size under this government, then you have to maybe posit that there are certain things that are better left to other levels of government, left to civil society, independent of government. And maybe one of those things might be deciding what I feed to my children. Maybe we want to go back to a time when parents could afford to feed their kids themselves. And it's not to say that nobody went hungry before 2015, but far fewer people were going hungry before 2015. And before 2015, there were programs that were organized at the local level in schools here in Winnipeg by churches and other not-for-profit organizations that were able to do this work. So you cannot at the same time say, we're going to reduce the size of the federal public service, but we must have federal public servants evaluating the food that we are feeding to my kids in Edmonton or Edmonton area, or to your children here in Winnipeg. We need to be honest about the trade-offs and the realities. Now, I think we have an opportunity to go a different direction with the positive proposals the Conservatives have put forward. Proposals to unleash our economy by repealing liberal, is it time or 1 minute? 1 minute. Okay. By repealing liberal laws that have blocked development, by recognizing the value of our natural resource sector for our national economy, by getting a government out of the way of natural resource development, by incentivizing home construction, pushing all levels of government to get homes built, by removing the industrial carbon tax and other pressures that are driving up the cost of food. We can unleash our economy, fix immigration in the ways that we've described, and implement the positive, constructive proposals that we are putting forward in Parliament every day through concurrence motions and all manner of other tools to make our case. And once again, thank you to the host of this event. Thank you to Kevin for your warm Winnipeg hospitality, and I look forward to doing this again.
He's so eager to get up and speak. Mr. Lamoureux.
Thank you. First of all, it is great to have Garnett here, and I very much appreciate it. Someone had made the statements about the last time something of this nature occurred. I cannot recall that it ever occurred in the past. So it is nice to be able to have this kind of debate. Even during elections, it can be a challenge to get all political parties sitting in a room. Having said that, when I think of the individuals that lead, the leaders of our political parties, I think of Justin Trudeau. He was a teacher. He had a different way of looking at things, I would suggest to you. We have Pierre Poilievre. Pierre Poilievre is very, very similar to me in one sense, is he's been a career politician. Then we have Mark Carney, who is not a traditional type of politician. I made reference to the fact that he was the governor of the Bank of Canada, appointed actually by Stephen Harper. He was the governor of the Bank of England, and he has been an economist. Take a look at the environment that we live in today, the challenges that we have to face. I would ultimately argue that Canadians did the comparison. They saw that even from within a political party, you can provide change. They saw someone that would actually be able to deal with our economic issues and at the same time be able to protect those things that are all of us hold very close and dear to our hearts. I love Carney's style of politics. He consistently talks about that building Canada strong. He wants Canada to be the strongest of the G7 countries. I believe he is one of the most ably minded North Americans to ensure that we're able to achieve the goal that we have set. That's why I believe that he's being received relatively well. It doesn't mean that we're perfect in every way, but what it does mean, I believe, is that we're on the right track. When I think of on the right track, we've had a lot of discussions about the national school program. We all agree. Even Garnett said it's important in terms of other jurisdictions are actually providing it. But that is not the case throughout the country. So in principle, if you believe that a child cannot learn on an empty stomach, then why wouldn't you have a national program?
1 minute.
The very same principle can be applied to the dental program for children, for seniors. But with one less than a minute to go, the economy. Canada is a trading nation. We need to have trade. That's how we substantiate the type of life that we actually have. We are a productive society. There are all sorts of opportunities that are out there. And I believe that we have every member of the Liberal caucus is focused on building that country that all of us then can say that Canada is the best country in the world to live. That is what my goal is, to continue to push that, and I believe that is shared amongst my caucus colleagues and indeed all members. But we want to achieve it in different ways. I believe Mark Carney way is the best way for all Canadians. Thank you.
Yeah, you mixed me. I made a series of mistakes today. First, I just want to say, Kevin, never trust a Long and McQuaid employee for NP trivia. The fellow who I rented this equipment from, he said, "Which MPs are you hosting?" I said, "Oh yeah, Genuis and Lamoureux." He said, "Oh, you know, Lamoureux, he used to teach at Winnipeg. He taught my sister." And worst of all, he said, "You taught her engineering." So I was like, wow, that's quite a career change, but maybe she built the budget. but I came here with a long list of engineering jokes, so now that's why I'm here with no sheet. I'm just spitballing now. So yeah, I suppose the second mistake I made also was there was a debate hosted by a student group, I believe, back in 2019, and that was by Trent Brownlee, the leader of the Liberal who's here right now. That's him over there in the black sweater and glasses. And I just want to add that Mr. Brownlee's crossed the floor as well since then. But yeah, I'm just gonna put the partisan stuff aside for a moment, and I also want to say thank you, gentlemen, for coming out. This really was something monumental for our campus and for our club as well. I truly believe it. I want this to happen more often. I'm really impressed by the turnout here from all folks, on campus and off campus. Really, I appreciate it. Thank you. In the current political climate, I think it's very important that we listen to each other and that we are able to have civil conversations with one another. And you've all been very gentlemanly and very gentlewomanly. But before you all leave, I'm hearing the shuffling of coats. I just want to say, we as a club are so grateful to our two MPs here that we have taken the liberty of getting some gifts for you two. Zoe, sweetheart, you want to come up here to give our MPs their gifts?
Oh, yeah.
So, gentlemen,
Excellent.
you may. Oh, you've already read it. Oh, come on. But no, of course, guys. This book right here, "Lament for a Nation" by George Parkin Grant. This is essential reading for anyone with a remote interest in Canadian politics or history. And Mr. Lamoureux, you may feel familiar here because Mr. Grant was actually your former boss, Mr. Ignatieff's uncle. Yes, we're a very small circle in Canadian politics, so we really are. But no, Mr. George Grant wrote this book at a time when the future of Canada was also quite grim. He didn't know if there was a nation left in the future. And this was after the defeat of John Diefenbaker. Were you referring to Mr. Diefenbaker? Okay. Sorry. I'm so sorry. But some of you were in the audience. I know that. You were around for Pearson and Diefenbaker, that whole shebang. But yeah, no, it's a very important book on the future of Canadian nationalism. And really, it presents a defense of Canada as an idea, as a nation, and I think anyone with an interest in Canadian politics should read it, conservative or liberal. Essential reading. So again, thank you, gentlemen, and thank you everyone for coming out. This has been a great event. Thank you. My pleasure. I appreciate you all greatly. Have a great night, everyone.
No.